Welcome to Capitol Preview, a weekly bipartisan discussion with Iowa legislators about the key issues facing our state. Brought to you by Mediacom.
Hi, welcome to another edition of Capitol Preview. My name is Bill Peard. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Iowa Cable and Telecommunications Association. Our show is brought to you as a public service to tell our viewing public what's going on up at the Capitol. We have various House members and senators. Today we have House member Zach Nunn from District 30, Republican from East Polk County. Welcome.
Bill, thank you very much for having me here
Good
this
to see you, Zach. I'm just going to jump in. It's kind of a conversational type of an interview, and we'll just kind of have a chat here. And the first question, I think, that is very important because education is really important to our state, is the status of the K-12 school funding.
Yeah, Bill, this year we've done some really good things, I feel, that have kept in record with what both the House Republicans and formerly the Senate Democrats and now the Republican Democrats in the Senate have worked on. Is for the last 10 years, roughly, we've added $735 million new dollars to schools. This past year alone, we've already got down to the governor's bill for $32 million in new spending. That goes directly to teacher pay, towards help in the classroom, and it builds on a compendium of $3.2 billion that we're investing in Iowa. I mean, that's almost half of our budget just on the K-12 program. Other areas where we tried to do great this year is to look at an $11 million spending for transportation costs. You know, and I know in our communities we have urban centers and we've got rural centers, and for those rural kids who are on the bus a long time, that eats up a school district's budget very quickly. And so this helps them. It's a one-year funding to help offset that cost, but then look towards building a long-term plan. And the last piece I'll offer is we've passed a third piece that deals with per pupil inequity, so providing funds to actually help create less inequity between students, whether they're in a rural community or whether they're in an urban community like Des Moines.
Very good. So I know also, Representative Nunn, you became chair of the Judiciary Committee this year. Sorry.
Yep, 3 weeks into session.
Yeah, exactly. What bills are you working on?
Well, Judiciary had a very aggressive session. In fact, we passed more bills out of Judiciary this past year than we have in the last 5 years. The good things about this are we're still looking at a number of really important bills. One for landowners, for renters. A couple of bills that are probably important for your listeners that are still live rounds are common sense solutions for animal abuse, how a dog or a cat is treated. Neglect, abuse, and torture are all things that I think we as Iowans believe is wrong. And how do we find better ways to incentivize good ownership, but then also recognize that there are criminal acts that can be involved. A couple of the other ones that are important to me, I've been working for a number of years on sentencing reform. It makes no sense to house somebody in a very expensive prison system here in Iowa at $10,000 a year if we can get them into a drug rehabilitation program for as little as a few dollars a day. We've been able to get that down to the governor, and for a first-time, non-violent drug offender, they now have the ability to go into a rehab program versus long-term incarceration. I think that's very important for everybody in the sentencing reform world because it gets that individual back to their home, back to their family, back to their community in a meaningful way where they've helped to break their addiction. The other piece on this is that we last year and have worked again this year on combating drunk driving in the state. We started a pilot program last year that said basically if you're caught as a drunk driver, you can go to jail, you may spend time in prison, or you can enter into this voluntary program that would mean 90 days sober, where you'd have to go into the courthouse twice a day, blow in the morning and the evening to find out if you've had any alcohol in your system, and if you have, you go straight to jail. If you can do that for 90 days, there's a real reality that you're probably going to break your addiction at some level to alcohol and be able to have a much more controlled environment. We're finding this in South Dakota. It has had just amazing success. We're excited to bring it to Iowa. This has been a bipartisan bill that we've moved forward. And yeah, I'm very happy the Judiciary has taken the lead on this.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a very cool program. It does.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
And it has some positive effects too, it sounds like.
It saves taxpayer dollars. It certainly helps our correctional facilities deal with the people who really need to be in correction. And most importantly, for the folks that have become addicted to alcohol, what we're seeing is people are being sent to jail 1, 2, 3 times and still habitually violating the law. Now it's safer not only for them, but for all of us when we're out there on the road and our kids and our families to know that, hey, somebody has broken an addiction to alcohol versus just doing their time in the county jail and now they're right back out there next weekend.
Well, good job on that. That
No,
seems
thank you.
promising. Mental health in Iowa. Where do we stand on addressing that? I know that's a huge, huge issue.
Mental health in Iowa, this is an area where we put a lot of resources last year, and we put even more this year. Just this past month, we passed the most historic mental health reform bill in the state, and we're looking at it now to go down to the governor's desk. It does three things that I think are very important. First, it moves us away from that kind of 19th century model of mental institutions to keep people in long term and more towards a community-based mental facility, which I think is better positioned for a 21st century solution. What I mean by that is that we have actual medical physicians who are able to help directly in those communities, so that if you have a loved one in your family who has a mental health challenge, they can actually stay in their home for the majority of the time. We passed a bill that also deals with telemedicine, so a doctor can actually talk to you over your phone and tell you, hey, these are the things that I'm challenged with, or I need a refill of subscription. They can ask you right there and maybe get it solved, so you don't even have to make that trip down to Des Moines to get your prescription refilled or have a conversation with a mental health professional. For some folks, even in my community, a simple drive from Altoona to Broadlawns might be the biggest challenge of the day, just getting that dedicated transportation. So being able to do it remotely, hugely important. The second aspect is acute critical care, so that when there's a challenge, we help an individual get the mental health needs that they have at that moment versus waiting in line or going to a jail. And then finally, providing the funding so that we can have sustainable residency programs here. We've bumped up to 747 beds in Iowa, which takes us to the next level up. But in addition to having beds, we got to have mental health professionals who are able to provide that training, the assistance, and then most importantly, you and I can both empathize with this, stay in the state after we're done training them.
Absolutely.
And so with these residency programs, both in Broadlawns, out in eastern Iowa, we'll have a cadre of individuals who we hope will stay here for at least 4 years. Hopefully they like it. Hopefully they'll stay even longer and provide the level of acute care that we need to help people in the home in an interim position, and then if we need to, move into a long-term facility where they can get sustained care if their mental health issue requars that.
You're taking on some big projects. I mean, these are
it's
good.
bipartisan
They're all
work.
very good. Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. How about combating opioid? I can never say that.
I know, right?
Drugs in Iowa.
The opioid challenge it's a national challenge. It's come from the president down to local community schools. A couple of the things we're doing that we've already passed, which I think are really important on the opioid crisis, is one, to prevent doctor shopping. Somebody can't just go out, get their prescription filled from this doctor, say, hey, I've got more pain here, I need to be able to get it refilled here. This actually puts together a statewide database that all of our docs can go in and check ahead of time and make sure, hey, you've already gotten your prescription filled, or actually we need to tailor your medication now, you're at the tail end of it. Yeah. The other aspect is getting rehabilitation and assistance when a patient needs it. So before it becomes an addiction, trying to identify and help educate. And then the third piece is that when we actually have somebody who becomes addicted, that we're going through and we're finding constructive ways to help them so they don't end up resorting to crime or become an addict that harms their family or their community. We can intercede at an earlier point. We've got a program put forward, and this provides some level of amnesty for folks so that if they are having a problem, they can actually come and seek help and not feel like they're immediately going to be put in a detention facility. I think that's the first step in anybody working on a path towards recovery.
Now, and you're not talking about just the criminal aspect of it, right?
No.
Because I mean, it's an addiction for
a lot of people.
Folks.
You could go into surgery. Right. Absolutely, you could go into surgery now, be assigned a painkiller, and find yourself addicted to it in as little as a week.
Yeah.
And unless you have, if your body's predisposed for this, you could find yourself really in a bad situation in a short amount of time. So we want to make sure that, one, doctors, when they're prescribing it, they're doing it responsibly.
Yes.
And then two, when somebody needs help, we've got a way for them to come into it. Crime should hopefully never enter into this, except for when it becomes a situation that's how they've been able to pay for their addiction.
Absolutely.
So let's break the addiction.
It's a big problem.
Right.
Next thing that's I'm curious about and very interested is cybersecurity and how is Iowa preparing for the future of the challenges in crime? Because it's a big deal. It's a big deal.
Absolutely.
And Iowa needs to be ready for that.
And I think all of us on some level know that it's an issue, but we don't realize how directly it impacts our life. So prior to this job, I worked on the National Security Council as the director of cybersecurity for the White House. One of the big things we came back for, we saw is some of our big credit companies have just done a really poor job in managing our data. There's been some great companies out there that have been a best practice for us, but one of the ones I'll give you an example, Equifax. So we all know Equifax lost roughly half of America's personal information. That means one of the two of us, probably both of us, had our information hemorrhaged by a credit firm that has no direct impact. I can't go and say, hey, I don't want Equifax I'm no longer going to be your customer. The challenge is that my small town banks, my Main Street banks, were getting the ire of citizens who said, my information's been hemorrhaged. I now feel very vulnerable about this. What are you going to do about it? And that small town bank looks to Equifax and says, hey, you guys need to correct this. And the credit agency is saying, it's not our problem. We're not going to deal with it. Well, here in Iowa, we think that's wrong. And working with the Attorney General's office, we've moved very quickly to set up a breach notification system that if information is lost by a credit retaining company like Equifax, they immediately have to report that on. Additionally, they have to ensure that there are best standards for security practices within that company so that if information is penetrated or somebody's probing that they're immediately alerting it off. And finally, an aspect of this is that when these things happen, that there will be consequences. So not only do they need to inform the Department of Homeland Security at the federal level, but we also need to let our attorney generals know right here at the state so they can, one, warn customers, but then also hold those companies accountable. So that's the big picture on breach notification. The other side of this is that you probably filled up your car with gas this Easter weekend, just like myself, and when you slide that credit card into the gas station, we're finding from a number of convenience stores, from the Hy-Vee within my own local community there in Altoona, was that people are putting devices over the top that capture both the magnetic information from that device, so they have your credit card, then they're also capturing the PIN number, called a skimmer, when you put your ATM card in. So now they're getting us both on our credit side and our ATM side. This is a $1 million theft that's happening in Iowa on a weekly basis. And the challenge is that we don't have a good way to prosecute these individuals. I'll give you a keen example. We've got a couple of folks who showed up in the state. They installed this on a number of devices. When people used their credit cards at the end of the day, they had hundreds of credit cards they were able to retain. And when the sheriff was called out to do this, they took the device, captured the individual they thought had planted it, took him to the jail, and by the time they had that individual in jail, the Bluetooth device that was emitting this information was erased by another criminal sitting in the parking lot of the jail. So when they get to court, they've got no information, they've got no evidence, and this individual gets away. So what we're trying to do by this is identify, just the possession of these devices for a illegal intent is enough for a sheriff or law enforcement to bring these individuals in. We've got to technology is always going to change, and that's a great thing. I would offer that technology is probably going to be our first way to safeguard it, but we also have to have laws that keep up with the technology to make sure Iowans every day aren't losing out due to some bad actors, a very small group who are affecting millions of dollars out of people's paychecks.
Well, and just when you think you have it figured out, right? Somebody else comes up with another solution.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I will give credit. The person who found it at the Hy-Vee in Altoona was actually a customer who alerted the owners of the store. The owners came out, found the device, called local law enforcement. Local law enforcement responded, did everything right, and actually was able to help make sure that didn't happen again.
We love the public, right?
Right.
They're our eyes and ears out in the...
They're the front line always.
Right.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Well, it's been a great conversation. Our time is done for this morning, but
Bill,
I
thanks for having me.
appreciate very much, Zach, you coming out, and it looks like you're a very busy man up at the Capitol.
I think you're doing the same. Thanks for all you do for our community,
Yeah.
Bill. I appreciate it.
Zach Nunn, Republican from Altoona. Thank you again.
Thanks, sir.
All right.